Let's see if this works. Technically, I think I got it so that I am live in 3 different places. So I think the weirdest thing is going to be like looking back and forth. So what I'll probably try to do is look at Instagram, since you guys are my primary, and that's where we said we were going to be. If you're joining on YouTube or on Facebook, I can also see you, and I can see your comments and all that stuff. So hi, welcome to the first official Talk About. We've had a couple of these like lives where I've talked about different topics back and forth, but I wanted to make it kind of an official ongoing thing that we can depend on, that we can bring topics that we care about, that we're wondering about. So if there's things that you're like, I don't get it, let me know and we can make it one of our talk abouts. The last Thursday of every month on Instagram, and it looks also like I'll be on Facebook and YouTube. I'll kind of shiny this up and make it all work a little bit better than what it is this time. But we're learning how to do all this. Today, we were going to talk about General Assembly and the decisions that were made there. So while I'm waiting for people to get plugged in and to get on here, I will kind of talk about what General Assembly is and why I was there. I'm also going to move this away from me because it's like moving every time I move. All the cameras are moving too. It's driving me crazy. But let me see. I don't see. Well, I guess we got 5 minutes before I'm supposed to actually be live. So we'll see how that goes. But so General Assembly is the national gathering of the Presbyterian Church. We do this every 2 years, but we used to do it every year. But we've found that we can do it every 2 years and it doesn't inhibit that much of business. So we do it every 2 years because it's really expensive. Before COVID, every presbytery would have a certain amount of commissioners that they could send. So the Detroit Presbytery has 3 ruling elders and 3 teaching elders that they can send. So you can imagine the cost, because our per capita dollars go to pay for the travel and the room and board and all that stuff for GA. So that's why every 2 years is how that works now. We, just like in a church, the congregation elects people to serve on the session. The session then elects people to go and serve at the presbytery, which is like the regional kind of area churches assembly. And then the presbytery chooses people to go to GA. So if you're going to the GA, you've been voted on by the presbytery to go and represent that presbytery. Commissioners are told to vote their conscience. So they're not told to vote, even a way that like, hopefully they're going to pick things that are beneficial to the ministry that is in Detroit, but it's not really what you have to do. A good commissioner probably will, but that is so that if we go in thinking we're going to vote one way on an item and there's talk and discussion and things are presented in a way that we're like, oh wait, we can do this differently, we're allowed to make those changes. We don't have to vote in the way that presbyteries make us vote. Same thing with session members. We try to be representative in how we elect our session leaders, and they are allowed to vote in a way that they see is best for the church from their perspective. So that is GA. It's usually all in person. Everyone serves on a committee. There's 16, 20, something like that, committees. All of those have like 30-ish, 40-ish people that are randomly assigned to serve on those committees. I was assigned to theology, worship, and education, which was a fun committee to be on. I got lots of books because we hear all the stuff from the Presbyterian Publishing Corporation, so I got lots of books. And normally, like, the committee work is all done in person, and then you do the plenary meetings. But because of COVID, things have gotten all mixed around. And actually, one of the decisions that GA voted on this year is that in 2 years in Salt Lake City, the plenary, someone told me I was saying it wrong. So now I'm like super like, plenary. Yeah. Anyway, those will be in Salt Lake City, and then the committee work will be online. So there's some rumors that like maybe the committee work will be like once a week for a month or something instead of 3 days in a row. I don't know how it's going to all shake out. I probably won't be a commissioner. So I have a feeling they'll go back to being completely in person, because that's one of the fun parts of all this stuff. So we're getting close to 7:00. I didn't want to start like officially going into work until into the stuff that we were voting on and decided on until about 7. But if you're joining on Facebook or YouTube, I can see you, even though, I'm not going to like look like I'm looking at you because we had said this is going to be on Instagram, and I found a way to do it on Facebook and YouTube as well. So we'll see. I can already kind of tell it's obviously not pushing the same way on Facebook, because like some of the people that I usually are on like almost immediately when I turn on my camera aren't there. So it's interesting. We'll learn how to trick these algorithms to do what we want them to do. I don't know. We'll see. 7:00. Here we go. We're on. So GA. It was great to be a commissioner. I've always, as long as I've been a Presbyterian, kind of wanted to go and see how the sausage gets made and see our polity at work, and see how those discussions become new ideas and new things that we're doing. So that was really exciting. One of the things that I really liked that they did is they had these, they called them, I'm going to miss what they were called. I thought it said on the top of here what they were called. They're essentially like, they were reminders of us to be inclusive, to think about whose voice was being heard, whose voice was not being heard, and ways for us to seek help if we saw a voice not being recognized or someone not being given the same amount of time as others. So it's called like equity markers or equity tools or something like that. I can't believe I forgot what they was talking about it all the time. But these were really cool. So this says things like, if you hear someone is being treated in a manner that is contrary to our values and rights as members of this committee, I can send a private message to the speaker. I can ask for recognition to pause the address and address the issue. I can speak with the moderator at the break or address it later. And those were encouraged for us we're like, that's not how we wanted this debate to go. We can speak up and let people know about that. So that was cool. And that was used in the committees and in the plenary meetings as well. And they were being used. People were stopping and saying like, hey, you said this thing and I don't think that's what you meant. Or if it was, let's address why that's a problem. And my cameras are still moving around and it's driving me crazy. Hold on. Okay, hopefully I am not touching anything now. So that was a cool kind of start. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was like the overtures and what we actually voted on and how we got to those things. So an overture is something that comes from a church or a presbytery. Essentially, it's something that a member of a church was like, hey, there's this thing that I really wish we would address as Presbyterians. And people hear that and go, yeah, I think that's actually a bigger discussion and not just what we want to discuss here in our presbytery or our church, but I think we needed to discuss at GA. So these overtures would come to general assemblies. So most of them are from, like, they've been developed over the last actually 4 years because we didn't talk about some of them in 2020. And the overtures are made, they're written, they're sent around to other presbyteries. Other presbyteries concur. They say, yes, I agree that this is a conversation we need to have. And then it is brought to a committee, and they review it and talk about it, and then bring it to the whole assembly to be talked about. So a couple things that came about from that. There was an overture about like climate change. That's a big issue in our country. And so we actually talked about this in 2020, I believe, talking about divestments. And I don't think we did. Maybe we did a couple of the companies, but this year they wanted us to divest from some of the fuel companies, from the fossil fuel companies. So we have a couple different gas companies that PCUSA money is invested in. And at the last GA, we were like, okay, but it also gives us a seat at the table. So let's talk to them. Let's use our seat to try and encourage these companies to become more or less sufficient on fossil fuels, more dependent on renewable energy. Well, there were 5 oil and gas companies that we went to the table. We showed them kind of what our expectations are as investors and how we wanted our money to be used. And we did not feel like they were moving quickly enough to slow global warming. And so the General Assembly voted to divest money from Chevron, ExxonMobil, Marathon Petroleum, Phillips 66, and Valero Energy. So those 5 companies, the PCUSA, any of our endowments, any funds that's owned by the PCU that are managed by the PCUSA, are being pulled out. We are asking for us to divest from those things. We did this before in hey JS, we did this before in, I think, when they were in Detroit. And we divested from things like Caterpillar because they were being used over in the Palestine-Israel conflict. And so we've divested before. This is one of the first times. I think this is like these 5 companies was the most companies we've divested from at one time. So that was kind of a big deal. But there were a couple other like climate change things. Let's see, what was the other? Where we wanted the Mission Responsibility Investment Committee to divest, but then they're also talking about trying to work with the companies that we are still invested in that are kind of moving forward, because we know that a lot of our members of churches depend on oil and gas companies for their living. And so we want to help them do what we believe needs to be done for the future as good stewards of God's creation. So I'm just going to take a brief break and say, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you're not going to see me looking straight at you because I'm technically on Instagram, but I found this fun way that I can also be with you guys, but I can also see your comments. So if you comment either on Instagram, YouTube, or Facebook, I can see that and I can engage with that and I can let you know what's up. So, if you have questions, if you're like, I hate that happened, definitely chime in, because that was part of the fun, was seeing the full debate and seeing that there were people on both sides of just about every overture, and hearing what made them passionate about what we were talking about. So that was really cool. There was actually one really cool thing there. We made a vote to approve declaring 2022 to 2032 the decade to end gun violence. So with like Matthew 25, we have these like initiatives, these things that we really want to promote and educate our constituents, our congregations, that's the better word, about. And so one of the things that they want us to focus on, the Presbyterian Mission Agency is going to develop tools for faith-based advocacy against gun violence, for studying the intersection of white supremacy culture, Christian nationalism, and gender in gun violence, and also we haven't divested yet, but we want to talk to Walmart, Dick's Sporting Goods, and Kroger, because we have investments with them, and they they sell non-semi-automatic rifles. We've already divested from semi-automatic rifles, but these 3 companies, we want to talk to them about how the money is used and what can be used to help raise awareness and make sure that we're doing that safely. So those. It'll be interesting. So you're going to hear Decade to End Gun Violence a lot over the next 10 years. You're going to hear that come up in a lot of different initiatives. Probably when we do our offerings, there'll be some companies and some organizations that we are supporting for that effort, that Decade to End Gun Violence. So that will be good. So awesome. Hey, Catherine, how are ya? I love that I can see people, and when I know who it is on the other side, I want everyone to be able to put their actual name in. So, hey, thanks. Let's see, what's another one? So one of the big things was family leave. It was debated hot and heavily in the committee, and then when it came to the floor of the assembly, it was brought up again. Family leave for pastors. So the original thing that was brought up didn't have any time on it. It just said that they wanted presbyteries to offer family leave to all employees, full-time employees, and pastors. But after some debate, we were able to include 12 weeks. So what was actually voted on is that in the Constitution, in the PCUSA Constitution, so this isn't in effect yet. What's going to happen is that it's going to go to all the presbyteries, and we need 2/3 vote of the presbyteries to actually get it into our Constitution. So anything that changes the Constitution, which is the Book of Order, and I should have grabbed it so that I could hold it up. But anything that changes the Book of Order, it has to go through couple general assemblies. It has to go to all the presbyteries a couple times. So it takes a long time, as it should, to change the Constitution. So this, if you go to a presbytery meeting, you'll hear talk about this, that they want to put into the PCUSA Constitution, ministers' terms of call shall include at least 12 weeks of paid family leave covering the birth, fostering, or adoption of a child, care for an ill or disabled family member, or healing from a loss or tragic event. And so that will be going out to the presbyteries soon. So that'll be one of the things that we hear about. I think that's important. I think that's one of the debates that our world is having, of what is respectful, what is a good thing to give to your employees. How do you show that you truly care about their work and what they're doing for you? And family leave is one of those things that we really want to put in there. We used to have in the Constitution that all calls had to have a 4-week vacation and 2-week study leave. It's not, those numbers aren't in there anymore because it's kind of expected now. We kind of do it. Everyone understands why it's important, how that makes our pastors stronger. And so it's just kind of a no-brainer. So that's kind of what we're hoping with this family leave too. We put in the number, we make it kind of strict at the beginning. We show everyone this is why you want to do that. And then it just becomes kind of what we do. One of the important things with this one is, you might not know this, maybe I don't want to tell you this, but all of the employment protection acts that the USA has federally, the secular government, disability, gender, race, any of those acts, disability acts, race acts for employment, do not count for pastors. So you as the church could fire me simply because I'm a woman. And you think, oh my gosh, who would ever do that? But it happens a lot. Every year, I'm in a lot of clergy women groups. Every year, there is some female pastor who goes on maternity leave, and 2-3 weeks into her leave, she's fired. They essentially say, we're going to look for another pastor. And they can do that because churches, separation of church and state, churches have the right to choose what leaders lead them. So like, I can't sue the Catholic Church to allow me to be a pastor, to be a priest in the Catholic Church. They have the right through their religious beliefs to choose who leads their church. So there's this ministerial exemption that's in, not just that, there's a couple other laws that have this ministerial exemption. So pastors have less rights than everybody else in the church on a Sunday. And so it's up to the PCUSA to make sure that those things are covered in our Constitution, because it's not covered. I can't sue a church for firing me because I get a disability in a court, like a U.S. court, but I can bring ecclesiastical discipline. I can sue the church through church court because it's in our Constitution. So that's kind of why that's there, and why that gets, you're like, oh, but everyone should get that. No one will. It's not exactly. We have to make it pretty explicit in the church. Similarly, the Book of Discipline, which is the last section in our Constitution, was like completely overhauled. Like, I would have to do a whole nother talk about just what was done for the Book of Discipline. Lots of, how long you can wait before statute of limits, what constitutes like free speech. Do I have the right to remain silent insofar as, like, if I do something on a church computer, can I deny access to that? Like, is that allowed? So there's a lot of things that happened in the Book of Discipline. That's exciting for me, but that's because I'm a nerd, so maybe it's not exciting to you. Let's go back to has anybody like heard any buzz? It's been about almost a month since we did GA. Has anybody heard any buzz? Twitter seems to be the place where PCUSA kind of talks about these things. So if you're on Twitter and you follow like GA225, which was the hashtag this year, you probably saw people back and forth. But I don't know, is there things that you're worried about? Things that you're like, oh my gosh, I heard this thing on the news? There were a couple things. There were protesters at the Presbyterian Center this year for a couple of the decisions. So anybody, I'm going to take a sip and let you guys think, is there any specific overture that you want me to absolutely address and talk about before I just like keep going down my list? Not seeing any, so I'm going to keep going down the list. So the one that got protesters, and it always does, if we ever have an overture that deals with the Middle East, we always have issues with it. So Israel-Palestine, we voted it was not very close, but it was pretty close vote, declaring or in recognizing that the laws and policies and practices of the Israeli government regarding the Palestinian people fulfill the international legal definition of apartheid. So essentially, the PCUSA has said that the practices of the Israeli government against Palestinian people is apartheid, and that it meets those things. Anything new for Matthew 25? I tried to look up what the original Matthew 20. They wanted to add a thing to Matthew 25, and I couldn't find what we essentially like figured out. They wanted to add something about gender, and I have a feeling it didn't go through. That was a pretty, like when you start something and you say this is what we're about, to try and change it can be a little bit wonky. So I looked at PC Biz and I could not figure out which overture was what. Because if the committee voted to not bring it to plenary, like to say like no, then it got into the first, into the omnibus, which was like 150 items that we just voted on at one time. Some things were drawn up and then the rest we just kind of voted through. So I just didn't have time. So I don't think anything big is happening for Matthew 25 specifically, but there are some things that are related to the things that Matthew 25 cares about, such as there was a litany of repentance, and I believe it's saved somewhere. It was very powerful. White commissioners reading and saying this litany of repentance for slavery. So they recited a litany of repentance, offering an apology to African Americans for the sin of slavery and its legacy. One assembly committee focused exclusively on issues of race and gender justice, including violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, disparities experienced by Black women and girls, racial disparities in healthcare, and concerns about white supremacy in the PCUSA, like how we see it showing up within our own structure, and working for reparative justice. The reparative justice thing is interesting, and I have sent it to a couple people. There's a group that is showing calculations of how you can kind of see what white supremacy or white privilege has kind of allowed to go into your church's bank account or your bank account if you're white, and how to calculate that. And they're actually creating a fund that you can give to that will work to balance those reparative justice and those initiatives. So that was kind of a big thing. I'll see if I can find the recording of that litany of repentance and link it into a couple things within our church stuff, because it was a really, really powerful moment. So that was a big thing. Let's see, what's another one that Matthew 25? I mean, we did talk about immigration, which kind of like systemic poverty is maybe a little bit in that. We officially became a sanctuary and accompaniment church. Now, those words are going to be confusing for a lot of people. So this was kind of an important one for us to know what it actually means. Because if you hear like the PCUSA is a sanctuary and accompaniment church, there's a lot of assumptions people can make about what that is. So the denomination, this is just saying that the denomination stands with immigrants and asylum seekers and is committed to working for justice in the U.S. immigration policy. It includes us accompanying immigrants, offering housing, legal assistance, going with them to immigration hearings. So the things that we do, like with La Familia or the Southeast Detroit immigration law firm that we work with at our church, it's essentially that is just saying that that's the kind of work that we want to do. So by saying we are a sanctuary and accompaniment church is not like we have to take in people and they're going to live in our churches, or we have to take certain measures. There's no mandate on it. It's just saying that as a PCUSA church, this is a value of ours, and we will support and create ways to get resources to this need. So that's kind of how that goes. Another big one. So literally while committee 3, I think committee group 3 was meeting, which was the committee that was talking about healthcare stuff, was when the Roe v. Wade decision was announced. And so reproductive justice was already one of the things we were going to talk about. We have talked about reproductive justice in the PCUSA since the 60s. It's in lots of our documents. It is something that we have always stood with what we believe Scripture says, that the child is property. Scripturally, a child is property until they are born, which is how the Old Testament kind of categorizes it. And so we have used that to inform our understanding of when life begins. And so reproductive justice, kind of old news for the PCUSA. But this time we talked about it, had a couple amendments made, and the resolution or the statement that is officially made now by the PCUSA, that we reject all attempts at all level of government to reduce, limit, or eliminate access to contraceptive and abortion care. So that is the official stance of the PCUSA Church on reproductive justice. And I think we might see some ways that we can work towards that. Maybe we'll look at what the offerings are going to, and keep an eye on where that money is going to support, because that'll be one of the things that'll come up. Here's another one. We have lots of committees in the PCUSA. We love our committees, and we created another one, a new LGBTQIA plus equity advocacy committee. This will be a permanent committee of the General Assembly, equivalent to access and accountability to the Advocacy Committee on Women and Gender and the Advocacy Committee on Racial Equality. So those other committees, they're kind of be the same. So those are just three of the advocacy committees. Their work is to advocate for those needs. And so we've had racial equity. We included women and gender, I think 2 GAs ago. And so now we have the LGBTQIA plus equity advocacy committee. Now, there's lots of committees, right? And you're like, oh, I might want to serve on one of them. That would be a great idea. There is a nominating committee at the GA as well. And in probably a couple weeks, maybe in a month or two, we will start seeing what openings, what are available. I think a lot of their meetings are held remotely now, but they also, our per capita dollars goes to help support those committees in their work. So if you're on one of those committees, you get help in order to support that, just like to go to GA, you get help with that as well. I think it's different levels of support. It's probably just budgeting, whatever the committee says they think they need. But that's always a great place to serve the church. A lot of fun opportunities internationally, nationally, to make some big choices and some big moves for the church. Speaking of per capita is the amount that we, the church, pays per member. So if you are a member of our church, we pay a certain amount for you to be a member, for you to be on our rolls. Most PCUSA members will pay their own. So we'll be asking for per capita, or we just did. I forget what the timing is. I think we just ended asking for per capita. And we'll say, if you want to pay your per capita, send it in, and then we send it on to Presbytery gets a chunk, and synods get a chunk, and GA gets a chunk. So per capita was increased a little bit. This is just the GA level. So at the GA level, every PCUSA member in 2023 is going to be $9.85. So every person, the church will send $9.85 per person to the GA. And then in 2024, it goes down by 5 cents. What? And so only $9.80. Right now it's $8.98. So they're little moves. But then when you start getting synod and presbytery, I think we're around $30 per person is per capita. But it adds up. We got all the churches that are in the Detroit Presbytery, and it creates the funding of how we get the help that we have regionally on our different councils. So it's a pretty great thing. I didn't talk about the moderators. That should have been the first thing I talked about. So the first thing that we vote on for GA are who our moderators are going to be. A couple years ago, they started doing co-moderators because it's not a paid position. It is a volunteer position, and you kind of become the face of the PCUSA for 2 years. So you go to the gatherings, you go to Triennium with the youth, you go to meet with our international partner, you show up and represent the church. And so it's a big job. And so they've found that two people have a little bit better ability to do that. What happens is leading up to GA, there will be people who like throw their hat into the ring. They say, we are going to run. Here's who we are. There's a couple like town hall meetings that we have. So we got to meet the candidates and ask them questions, see who they are, how they interact. And then we vote. The first plenary meeting, we vote. And so this time we voted for Ruth Santana Grace and Siobhan Starling Lewis. They are co-moderators, and the theme, Unbounded We Thrive, was the theme that was with that. So I would look them up on like Twitter, Facebook, wherever you are, because they are incredible women. Ruth is, so we know because we have a parish associate that has some voice disability. And so Ruth also has that, but like now is the moderator of PCUSA, is the voice and the face of who we are. And Siobhan is just a dynamite person. Actually, all the big wooden earrings you're seeing me wear is because she was wearing them on a lot of the videos on the online. So I was like, oh, those are really great. So I found out who made them and got myself some jewelry while I was sitting and voting for those things. So that's what they said in this. So this is like the 2-page, like 800 words or less review. There's so much more. Like the first vote that we had was like 150 items that just went through. The one that didn't make it on here that I think probably should have was a initiative to begin writing a new confession. So when we talk about our Constitution, we're actually talking about 2 books. We're talking about our Book of Order, which has our foundations and our worship and our polity and our discipline, like how we do that. Then we also have a Book of Confessions that are historical documents. They go back through like Calvin, through like they're old. They're not just PCUSA. They're like what has been moving on. And so we voted to have a new confession written. Now, it takes a long time to get a confession written. Those of you who have been around as Presbyterians for a while know that we voted on one, the Belhar Confession, which was written in apartheid South Africa, and we voted to include that in our confession. Confessions are supposed to show what the church of today needs to witness to and confess for the future of the church. So these are historical documents that show us who we have been and how we have interpreted scripture, what our values have been, and help us to go forward faithfully on that same track. There are things in the confession, especially some of the older documents, that are absolutely anti-Semitic, that are really awful against women. But that was the time, like that was when it was written, was in the 1400s. So they're not like mandates of what we have to believe. They show what the people of that time were witnessing and living through and what needed to be recorded for the future of the church. So this new confession, this committee will get together and we'll look into our world in 2022, 23, and say, what do we need to witness? Do we need to witness to gun violence? Do we need to witness to racism, to gender issues, to sexuality issues? What does the church of us today need to witness and present for history to know about us? So that'll be a big thing. It's going to take a long time for it to like go to all the presbyteries and back and forth and all that stuff, but it'll be really fun to say like, oh, I remember when we first started that committee, like that was back in 2022. It was great. So yeah, so that's an important one. Another one that you can get on to the committee if you go to the PCUSA website and get all signed up for that. I will, when I start seeing those applications come out, I'll put them around the church, and you can see what openings are available. And if you're not feeling like you want to serve on the national level, there's openings in the PCUSA, not PCUSA, Detroit Presbytery level. Ask Rosie. She knows all the openings. She's on the nominating committee this year. So there are still openings to serve the greater church on that level. And I'm sure our church will have openings as well too. Like our nominating committee is going to get started on who will be our elders and deacons, and who will be in our committees as well. So if there is something, like if there's something in here that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're talking about that. We are addressing Israel, Palestine, climate change. We have, committees that talk about climate change and how we as people of faith need to address climate change. What does God need from the stewards of this creation to be doing and saying and actively participating in the system? As broken as it may be, we are here and we need to use our faith to inform how we want our world to be and how to shape it. If you care about gun violence, the next 10 years, the PCUSA has declared they want to address this. They want to make sure that this is a priority. We want to end gun violence in the next 10 years. If that's something that you're like, yeah, absolutely, I would love to do that. Let's get you involved. Let's figure out how we can use that passion and that energy and those gifts for that service. Immigration, reproductive justice, any of these things would be a wonderful thing to serve on. One of the moments that I thought was kind of interesting. So we didn't have a full GA in 2020 because of the pandemic. And so there were things that were set off. Like if they weren't immediate business that we needed to handle, we put it off until this GA. And so some of the overtures came and we were like, this is already passed or whatever. And one of them was our international peacekeeper, I think it was the Peace Fellowship, had brought an overture. So they were working on it in like 2018, probably, to bring to the 2020 General Assembly to ask for us to send mission coworkers or people to go to the Ukraine and assess what was happening on the ground, because they were already in 2018 starting to feel like there's something going on. And so these are Presbyterians. These are Presbyterians sitting on committees who are really passionate about international peace, and they want to spend their time looking at what the world is doing and what the world is facing. And this committee 4-6 years ago was like, there's something happening in the Ukraine. We should probably go and check that out. And they were absolutely like, if we didn't have this pandemic, we would have absolutely been on the front curve as the Presbyterian Church, that something was happening over there that needed to be addressed. So when you think like serving the church, oh, I don't know if I really want, like, what is that really going to do? Especially in the PCUSA, we are often on the front edge of issues. When we had the brief statement, we talked about racism, and that was right at the beginning of like civil rights stuff. We're a little bit behind the curve on the Belhar with that, but Belhar, it got there. If you look at the confession in our book of confessions and see like, okay, when was this adopted and what was happening in the world at that time, you're like, wow, this is a really remarkable statement for a church to make in that moment. Like now they might seem like old news, but in that moment, which is why these confessions are so important to record for history, to show this is who we are. We are people who care about peace in the Ukraine. We are the Presbyterian Church of the United States of America, but we care about what's happening over there. We want to be advocates and to talk to people who are in power and get some help over there before things blow up. So often these committees are like right on top of things. And the PCUSA Church, has money that they invest. So they do have seats at some pretty important tables. We have advocacy groups that are in Washington, D.C. that try and help make what we believe as people of faith be something that our representatives care about. We have mission coworkers on every continent trying to work on peace and making sure that everyone is equitable and access to all the rights that they need. So when we think about ourselves as a church, when we get to that GA level, it starts becoming very apparent that we are not just a church in Birmingham. We are, but we also are connected to churches everywhere. And if there is something that is needed, we can rally, we can create these overtures, we can make statements, we can be on the forefront of things that the world needs to address and be a voice for change. So I very much enjoyed GA. If you are a nerd like me, one of the things that you can do is Presbyterian Outlook is a magazine that stays up on all of this stuff. PCUSA, GA/PCUSA has a lot more information. PCBiz.org has all of these overtures that you can look through and scan through and see how those work. So there's lots more that you can do if you are interested in that. One of the things that they're going to do is restructure like the General Assembly and the mission. Like there's restructuring happening, just like there is in the PCUSA. There's restructuring happening in the General Assembly. So, it's the Presbyterian drama, and it can be, fun to follow and figure out what's going on. So yeah, that is GA. That is the most important parts of GA, I think, that I got through in like 46 minutes. What in there? Is there anything that you're like outraged that we would like do? Like, on this thing, they put Israel-Palestine at the very top. It's like the first most controversial thing. They're just like, let's get this over with. I think I would say that's the one that's probably going to raise a lot of talk is declaring Israel's government apartheid. I don't know. How do we feel? Like, are we proud that the Presbyterians are having these discussions? Are we like, why do we care? Why are we worried about all these other issues? I don't know. It can come off as both ways. Climate change, gun violence. I feel like it was a lot of the stuff that we talk about in the news. There will be a new edition of the Book of Order. The Book of Confessions will not have a new version. Yeah, no, I don't think we change anything in the Book of Confessions. And that one is the one that will get changed when this committee starts presenting, if they vote to approve the new confession. And the overtures that came for that confession, some of them had to deal with race, but we kind of gave them the like, yeah, it could be about that, but let's not just say it has to be about that. So we don't know what that'll be about. But there will be a new Book of Order, probably in like a year, I think, because you got to go through all the Presbyterians have got to vote on all those ones that we have to get 2/3 vote on. And the Book of Discipline is like literally a complete rewrite. So that's going to take some time. So once those are all approved, they know what the votes are, then we'll have another one, which is why our Book of Confessions always say like 1919 or 2019 to whatever. It's always just like 2 years because we change it every time. What will they do to support their stance on Palestine? So from that overture, calling that apartheid, we had a lot of, there's a group of interfaith leaders that are in the Middle East that came and talked to us. So they're Jewish and Christian and Muslim. There was a whole group of leaders that came and talked to us. And they were really excited that we said this because now that there is at least one denomination that will declare it, so they can now start showing like, look, people are noticing what's happening. and they can start putting some pressure on to say, like, you're not getting good press. Like, we need to stop some of this stuff. The other thing that was in Palestine is they're going to push like our advocates that are in the Middle East or in Washington that are dealing with people who have kind of power and say in that, is to put our effort behind the Gaza siege. They called it something else, but essentially they're just like random shooting. And they're going to be really focusing on that, to stop that, and then calling the government practices apartheid will hopefully bring some eyes to the issue, and more people will join us in saying, like, yeah, that does actually meet the international guidelines for apartheid. And we're not the first ones to say. We're the first. We might be the first denomination, maybe not. One of the first denominations to say that, but there's organizations, there's governments. I think the UN said it, that they're calling it apartheid now, and so by like saying what it is, they're like, if now we can say people are noticing, they see this, they're looking it in the eye. So instead of ignoring and being like, oh, it's not that bad, it's not bad. Now they can go, it's bad. We need to do something. So that's kind of the power of these like statements that the PCUSA Church makes. A lot of people kind of like poo-poo it, and they're like, oh, we just make statements, we don't really do anything. But there is some power in declaring what is happening, to say this is what it is. And that hopefully will have some effect going forward. And it helps like me as a leader to say, if I hear about some initiative in Birmingham or some fundraising that's happening, I can say, hey, that is something the PCUSA has declared we should care about as a PCUSA church. So let's go and do that. So it helps me kind of get my radar on what's happening in our area that I know the PCUSA might have grants for, or might have speakers that we can, bring out for those kinds of things. So it's nice to know what the PCUSA is prioritizing, so us leaders can kind of know, okay, this is what we're prioritizing and what is being said. So yeah. Any other questions? I didn't get any comments from YouTube or Facebook, so I'm like wondering if this worked at all. I'll have to go on and look at the like statistics afterwards and be like, did anybody say anything on YouTube and Facebook? Because I didn't get any comments. If you're still watching on YouTube or Facebook, type like a hi so that I know that this actually worked. Because if it didn't, I will not do this again. There are other things that the GA kind of looked at. Thank you, Dawn. That helps me know that it actually worked. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you hear rumblings, like anytime we say anything about Israel and Palestine, and especially if it is on the surface supportive of Palestinian people, we always get called anti-Semitic. And that was what the protest was. There was a huge balloon outside of the Presbyterian Center that said PCUSA is anti-Semitic. That's always going to be what people throw that word out there. And that's a great conversation to have. And we need to make sure that we are including our ecumenical partners and interfaith partners in that conversation. And so the reason why we had that group from the interfaith group come is because there were Jewish leaders who were saying this is apartheid. They don't want the Jewish faith to be tied in with the practices of the Israeli government. Though they don't want that to have to be the same thing. They're saying we don't really like the way that they're doing this, and we don't want that to be the Jewish way. So we need to speak up against those practices. So definitely those things are going to be out in the news. People are going to be talking about PCUSA as we talk about reproductive rights, as we, talk about gun violence, as we host these different events. People will say the PCUSA is this, PCUSA is that. this is why I wanted this talk about, is for us to say, what is going on? Part of my job is to be in the know, to read all of these articles, and kind of help people understand what this is, so you don't have to read everything. Especially because I was a commissioner this year, I heard all of the debate, so I can tell you what both sides said. And it doesn't have to be just like PCUSA. It could be just Birmingham. Like, we get rumors, we're people, we're an institution, we're a church made of people, and people talk. And having a space where we can bring those things to light and really talk about them is what I hope this Talk About series ends up being. My role, I will see it as like, if there are a lot of people on one side of the fence and not a lot on the other, like, I will play devil's advocate on here and be like, what about this? What about that? So that we can have a full conversation about the things that are creating tension and issue, and essentially will become to define who we are as a church, as a presbytery, and as a denomination. So these spaces, I think, are really good. And the reason why I'm doing it online is because this anonymity is really powerful. Like, you can go, if you're like really heated up about something I'm talking about, you can go and create like a little Finsta, a fake Instagram account on another email, and come in on, Joe Schmo 357 and go ahead and ask the question. I don't need to know, that that's Janet or that's Sandra. I don't need to know who you are. You can always find a way to ask and get those things on the internet that are anonymous. So the anonymity is a blessing and a curse. I'm hoping that in this Talk About space, that anonymity can be a blessing, and we can have some real conversation, get some things out, release that stress valve a little bit, and have a conversation. So yeah, a very real explanation of GA. I love polity. I am a polity nerd. I'm not like high level, like I'm not a parliamentarian, maybe one day, but I love polity because I love that there is a structure, that we aren't just willy-nilly deciding things, that we have spaces where we talk, and we prioritize those spaces that we talk. Like, we don't make a decision unless we've made the decision, and then we bring it back to the presbyteries and we bring it, like, we really talk. It slows things down. It's a pain in the butt, but that, I love it. I think it's great. I was excited to go to GA, and I still had a wonderful time. It is a little bit disheartening to watch the sausage get made. Sorry, Catherine, that's not a jab at sausage and stuff. I know that's your your line of work. But it is a little like, oh, yeah, we do sometimes complain about things and don't have a real solution yet. We just make another committee to study it. Oh, yeah, sometimes what we think we need, which is 16 weeks of family leave, there's no way we're going to get it because not everyone's on board. So it is a little bit of like letting the air out of the balloon of like, okay, well, we didn't, charge the, all the way forward. But it is still so needed. And sometimes we talk too much about like, committee work, it's not any fun. But it's also where stuff happens. And to quote Hamilton, to be in the room where it happens, to see how this gets fleshed out, how we make amendments and we change things and we pray about it. It's pretty cool. And I think it is really inspiring. And it makes me really confident that the PCUSA Church is staying on a faithful track. If we can remain calm and confident in the Spirit's faithfulness, we can be sure that we are listening and following where God wants us to go next. So that is the point of GA. Go to PC GA-PCUSA, and there's recordings on there. There was a really great worship service on Juneteenth that also was recorded and is online. Just a lot of really cool things. You could spend probably the rest of your summer rewatching all the plenary meetings, 60 hours in a week on Zoom. was what we ended up doing. From 10 a.m. Eastern to like 11, sometimes almost midnight, was the plenary. So like when I talk about like, oh, it's not very fun, like that was rough. Maybe not though, because I got a lot of house cleaning done, like put the thing in my ear, and before I voted, it would like go ding, and I'd be like, oh, I got to come back and vote, like listen to it and then come back. So like maybe the plenary stuff was fine. One of the cool things about the plenary is that we have delegates as well. Now I'm going to like talk for another 30 minutes because I got on another topic. So at GA, we also have delegates. Delegates we have young adult delegates. We have theology student, like people who are in seminary delegates. We have ecumenical delegates, so people who are Methodist and Lutheran and different denominations. And we have our mission coworker delegates. And what they are there for is they advise the commissioners. So if there's a vote on the floor and we call for the question and we're ready to vote, the moderators will first ask the delegates to vote, and the delegates vote, and we see kind of where they ended up on the thing. For me, like if the young adults are like all yes on it, we either vote yes now or they're going to do it in 10 years when they're the commissioners. So that's kind of how the delegate vote helps us. But it's also good to see, we had one about laying on of hands. And if we could, when we were ordaining elders, if someone had been an elder earlier, like 10 years ago and was coming on a session again, should we relay on our hands? Because that person is not reordained. Their ordination has been the whole time. And we wanted, I think it ended up being like to not lay on hands, but to offer another kind of symbol, to not get confused that like these are the people that are newly being ordained and these are the people who are being commissioned. And that was a vote that our ecumenical partners were very passionate about, because laying on of hands in other denominations is a huge deal. If you get to have laying on of hands, we do it, people are leaving the church, the children are going back to school. Like the laying on of the hands is not like, it gets closer to a sacrament in some other denominations. So that was good to hear from our ecumenical partners that was really might be a problem if we kind of willy-nilly throw around laying on of hands, that they might not think that we're being good friends or faithful partners in Christ. So those are the job of the delegates, is to help the commissioners get kind of a read of different situations, and then we vote, and then we get to vote our conscience. There's going to be some debate around young adult and youth delegates. It used to be youth delegates. They were like literally youth. They had a hard time getting youth to do it because it's the first thing out of school. Like they don't want to go to GA. So they made it young adult. This year we voted they had to be elders, which is not great, because it means you can't send a young adult unless they're an elder. And if it's a church that doesn't ordain like their youth, then it limits the amount of, there's a lot of stuff with that. Those kind of delegates are important. What I would love to see is to go back to youth delegates and for young adult commissioners to be sent. So every presbytery can get their, 2 or 3 to 6 people that are sent, but then they can also get one more vote if they send a young adult commissioner. I don't know. Maybe I'll write an overture. Who knows? This has been lots of fun. Next, I think we covered GA. Like I'll kind of keep an ear out on if there's anything else. But the next time I meet, I think I wanted the topic to be about the pastor search process. Because at Birmingham, we are full swing into it now, guys. So I want to make sure everyone understands the process of searching for a new pastor in the PCUSA. what might happen, best case scenario, some like wrenches that might be thrown so that we can remain calm and confident that the Spirit is sending us our right leaders, and we don't get stressed out because we just don't understand what's happening. So that's going to be the topic of my August talk about last Thursday of the month, 7 p.m. I think this thing on Facebook and YouTube worked. I'm going to tweak it a little bit. So hopefully it'll be all 3 platforms. We're going to talk about it. We're going to bring it up. We're not going to bury it. We're not going to be covert. We're going to talk about it. We're going to bring this forward, and we're going to talk about this as a church. If you have a topic that you're like, we really need a space to talk about this thing, email me, call me, put it in, email. My cat's like, are we done yet? Can we go to dinner yet? It's dinner time. This is Kenya. She'll make an appearance at Talkabouts every once in a while. The internet's love the furry babies. Yeah, furry babies. The internet loves you. So I will see you the last Thursday of August at 7 p.m. Eastern for another Talk About. Have a good night, everyone. Oops, I'm still live.